Why did the room go quiet the moment she sat down? Not because she spoke, not because she demanded attention, but because no one expected her to be there. She slid into the last chair at the briefing table, helmet under one arm, flight suit still creased from the morning air. The chair scraped softly against concrete, a small sound, enough to draw glances, enough to trigger assumptions. Too young, too calm, too out of place. The mission screen glowed at the front of the hangar, casting pale blue light across faces hardened by years of night raids and failed extractions. Names on shoulder tabs told stories she hadn't lived yet, at least not the way they had. Captain Rhodes didn't acknowledge her arrival. He didn't need to. The room already had. "She's the pilot," someone whispered, not quiet enough. Another voice followed, "That's a joke." She kept her eyes forward, hands folded, breathing steady. Inside, something tightened. Not fear. Recognition. She'd heard it before, in flight school, in simulations, in rooms where confidence was measured by volume instead of precision. The screen changed. Terrain maps, wind corridors, elevation lines that looked harmless until you flew through them under fire. "This extraction window is 12 seconds, Rhodes said. "Miss it, we lose the ground team." No one questioned him. They leaned forward, focused, serious. Except one man near the wall, arms crossed, watching her instead of the screen. He looked like someone who had buried friends. She felt it. The mission was simple in theory. Insert a recon sniper pair into hostile terrain, provide overwatch, extract before dawn. Simple plans were the ones that failed fastest. Rhodes finally glanced down the table. His eyes stopped on her. "And you are?" She stood, not fast, not slow. "Lieutenant Mara Hale," she said, "assigned rotary wing pilot." A pause, half a second too long. Rhodes nodded once. "You've flown hot extractions before." "Yes, sir." "How many?" She answered honestly. That was her mistake. A few low chuckles rippled through the room. Someone leaned back, shaking his head. Rhodes didn't smile, but his eyes hardened. "This isn't a training flight, Lieutenant." "I know." "Then understand this." He gestured to the map. "Wind shear through this canyon has grounded better pilots than you." Her mouth stayed shut, her jaw didn't. Inside, memory stirred. A night over Kandahar. A medevac landing with one engine coughing. A voice on the radio begging her not to pull up yet. She pulled up anyway. The right moment had come. She felt it before she'd seen it. Sometimes numbers weren't enough. Sometimes silence mattered. "I won't fly if I can't fly it," she said evenly. The man by the wall snorted. "That's comforting." She didn't look at him. Rhodes studied her a moment longer, then turned back to the screen. "You'll be shadowed. One chance. If you hesitate, I pull you." "Yes, sir." She sat down. Her pulse didn't slow until the lights dimmed. As the briefing ended, chairs scraped again. Voices rose. The room emptied around her faster than she expected. No one waited. No one asked her where she trained. No one cared. Except the man from the wall. He stopped beside her chair. "You freeze up there," he said quietly. "People die." She met his eyes for the first time. "I don't freeze." He held her gaze, searching, measuring. "Hope not," he said, "because the sniper you're flying in, she doesn't miss." That landed deeper than he knew. She watched him walk away. Sniper. Female. Good. Outside, the desert wind had teeth. It clawed at her flight suit as she crossed the tarmac toward the helicopter. The aircraft waited like it always did, silent, indifferent, unforgiving. She ran her hand along the fuselage. "Don't embarrass me," she whispered. The crew chief glanced up. "You talking to the bird or yourself?" She almost smiled. "Almost." Inside the cockpit, the world narrowed. Gauges, switches, familiar resistance under her hands. This was where the noise stopped. This was where doubt didn't fit. But tonight was different. Tonight she wasn't just flying. She was being watched. The sniper climbed aboard last. Slight build, movements economical, eyes that didn't linger anywhere too long. They nodded at each other, no words. The engine spun up, the rotors blurred, the desert flattened beneath them. As they lifted off, Mara felt it again. That quiet pressure behind the ribs, the one that never showed up in reports or evaluations. Expectation. Not of success. Of failure. The canyon rose ahead, dark and narrow, wind curling through it like a living thing. Approaching corridor, she said into the mic. No response, just breathing on the line. She adjusted her grip, calculated drift, felt the air instead of fighting it. The helicopter shuddered. Someone cursed softly behind her. Easy, she murmured, not to them, not to herself, but to the machine. The wind slammed them sideways. For half a second, instinct screamed, pull up. She didn't. She waited. The gust broke, the air settled, the opening appeared exactly where it should have. The sniper's voice came over the intercom, calm, almost reverent. Hold that line. Mara exhaled. They dropped the team in silence. As they climbed out, tracers lit the far ridge. Incoming, someone shouted. Mara didn't shout back. She didn't need to. She banked hard, too hard, someone would say later. But the canyon let her through. As they cleared the ridge, the sniper spoke again. Nice flying. Mara didn't answer. Her hands were shaking now. Not from fear. From relief. From the knowledge that somewhere behind her, someone who had been dismissed the same way she had trusted her anyway. And trust, she knew, was heavier than reputation. The mission wasn't over. But something else had begun. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What happens when silence becomes heavier than gunfire? The helicopter settled into a holding pattern miles out, rotors cutting the cold night air into rhythmic fragments. Below them, the canyon swallowed sound. Above them, the stars looked sharp enough to cut skin. Mara kept her eyes forward, hands steady on the controls, but her mind refused to stay quiet. Insertion was clean, too clean. That usually meant something else was wrong. Fuel's good, the crew chief said, trying to sound casual. We can loiter. Mara nodded. She didn't answer right away. Her headset crackled with low-level radio traffic, coded bursts, clipped acknowledgments, the kind of voices that had learned to waste nothing. She listened for one voice in particular. The sniper. Her call sign was Sparrow, that was all Mara knew. No rank, no bio, just Sparrow. Overwatch in position, Sparrow finally said. Calm, measured, like she'd said it 100 times before tonight. Mara felt her shoulders loosen a fraction. Copy, Mara replied, holding. Silence returned. Minutes stretched, the kind of minutes that felt longer when you were responsible for people you couldn't see. Mara checked the wind again. It had shifted slightly, curling unpredictably through the canyon. She compensated without thinking. Her hands knew what to do before her mind finished the sentence. Below, Sparrow lay prone on rock that still held the heat of the day. Her rifle was steady, barrel aligned with a valley that looked peaceful from above. It was. She had been ignored at the briefing too. Not openly, not cruelly, worse. She had been treated like background. Another asset, another variable, another body behind glass. She learned long ago that being underestimated was quieter than being doubted, and far more dangerous for everyone involved. Her spotter whispered wind data. Sparrow absorbed it, then discarded half of it. The canyon didn't obey math the way classrooms promised it would. She watched dust drift, leaves tremble, a scrap of cloth caught on a thorn bush fluttered once, then went still. She waited. Back in the helicopter, Mara shifted her weight slightly. The aircraft responded like a living thing. She'd always preferred machines that told the truth. People rarely did. Her thoughts drifted somewhere she didn't invite. Her first evaluation flight. The instructor who'd smiled politely while checking boxes. The way his tone changed when she outperformed expectations. Surprise mixed with something else. Discomfort, maybe. "You're good," he'd said, "for now." For now. Below, Sparrow adjusted her breathing. She thought of a different memory. A training range, a voice behind her, "You sure you can handle that recoil?" She hadn't answered then either. She'd let the target fall instead. The radio hissed softly. "Contact," Sparrow said. Mara felt it before she processed the word. Her spine straightened. The night sharpened. "Describe," Mara replied. 3 movement patterns, not local, armed. The ground team was still en route to their objective. If Sparrow engaged too early, the mission changed. If she waited too long, it might end. Mara circled wider, keeping the helicopter's profile low. She didn't ask questions she couldn't afford answers to. Seconds passed. Then, "Stand by," Sparrow said. Mara held her breath without realizing it. Down below, Sparrow's finger rested alongside the trigger guard. Not inside, not yet. One of the figures stopped, looked up, not at the sky, at the canyon wall. Sparrow felt it in her chest. "Wrong." The man raised his hand. Sparrow fired. The sound was sharp but brief, swallowed by distance and terrain. The man dropped without ceremony. The others scattered. "Target down," Sparrow said. "Compromised." Everything accelerated. Gunfire erupted from the valley floor. The ground team's radio burst alive with urgency. Words overlapped. Coordinates flew. Mara didn't wait for permission. She dropped altitude. "Lieutenant," someone started. "I see it," she said, voice tight. "Hold on." The canyon narrowed faster than before. Tracers stitched the air below them. The helicopter shuddered as turbulence and adrenaline collided. Mara pushed through. Her mind did something strange in moments like this. It slowed. Sounds separated. Choices became clean. Left or right? Up or down? Now or too late? A round cracked past the cockpit. The crew chief swore. Mara didn't. She flared just enough to give the ground team cover, then slid laterally, presenting a harder target. Extraction point compromised. Someone yelled over the radio. "New point," Mara said immediately. "Mark it." A beat. Then Sparrow again. "I see a ridge clear enough, 60 meters north." Mara adjusted course, without asking how Sparrow could see that far that fast. She trusted her. The helicopter dipped, then rose. The ridge came into view, steep, unforgiving, barely a landing zone. Mara committed anyway. The skids kissed rock, not clean, not perfect, enough. "Go," she shouted. The ground team poured in. Shouts, weight shifts. The helicopter groaned under sudden mass. "Last man," someone called. Mara pulled collective hard. The helicopter climbed, scraped, lurched free. They cleared the ridge as gunfire chased them into the dark. Only when the canyon fell away did Mara realize her jaw hurt from clenching. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Sparrow was the last to board. She secured her gear with efficient movements, then finally looked up at Mara through the open cockpit door. Their eyes met. Just a nod. Respect didn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it was just the absence of doubt. They landed at base just before dawn. The sky was turning pale, the way it did when night didn't want to let go yet. As the rotor slowed, voices returned. Debriefs, logistics, after-action language that tried to make chaos manageable. Mara shut down the engine and sat still for a moment, hands resting on her thighs. Her pulse was still loud. Rhodes approached. His expression was unreadable. "You flew aggressive," he said. "Yes, sir." A pause. "It worked." She met his eyes. "Yes, sir." He nodded once and walked away. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise. It was something rarer. Acknowledgement. Later, in the quiet between tasks, Sparrow found Mara near the hangar, wiping dust from her gloves she didn't need to clean. "You didn't hesitate," Sparrow said. Mara shrugged, didn't feel like a choice. Sparrow studied her for a moment. "It never does." They stood there as the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the tarmac. "I used to think being invisible was safer," Sparrow said quietly. Mara didn't answer right away. "I used to think being perfect would make people listen," she replied. Sparrow almost smiled. Almost. Because they both knew the truth now. Being unseen didn't mean being weak. And being doubted didn't mean being wrong. Sometimes it just meant the world wasn't ready for what you could do yet. And sometimes the only answer was action. The kind that spoke once and echoed forever. What do you do after you've proven yourself and still feel unseen? The debrief room smelled like burnt coffee and dust, the kind that settled into walls after years of long nights and short explanations. Mara sat near the end of the table this time, not by instruction, but because no one had silently claimed the seat before her. That alone felt strange. Across from her, Sparrow leaned back in her chair, arms loose, posture deceptively relaxed. If someone didn't know better, they might think she wasn't paying attention. But Mara had seen the way her eyes tracked movement, how nothing slipped past her when it mattered. Rhodes stood at the head of the table, fingers resting on the edge like he was holding the room together through sheer will. "Mission success," he said, barely. No one argued. "Enemy contact was heavier than anticipated," he continued. "Extraction required improvisation." A few eyes drifted toward Mara, not accusing, assessing. Rhodes followed their gaze. Lieutenant Hale kept the bird in the air when she shouldn't have been able to. Mara felt heat rise behind her ears. She kept her face neutral. Ground team walked out because of it. That earned a nod from one of the operators, subtle but deliberate. Rhodes turned a page on his tablet. Sniper Overwatch neutralized the primary threat before it escalated. Sparrow didn't move. "She waited," Rhodes added. "Most wouldn't have." Sparrow finally spoke. "Most don't listen to terrain." The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone chuckled softly, not mocking, almost impressed. Debrief ended without ceremony. Chairs scraped. People stood. Conversations restarted in low, controlled tones. Mara gathered her gloves and helmet. As she stood, Rhodes stopped her with a look. "Lieutenant, walk with me." The corridor outside was narrow, lit by humming fluorescents. Footsteps echoed louder than they should have. "You understand why you were shadowed tonight," Rhodes said. "Yes, sir." "You also understand why that may change." Mara nodded once. Rhodes stopped walking. "You flew like someone who's been here longer than your file says." Mara chose her words carefully. "I've flown through worse." Rhodes studied her, then exhaled slowly. "That doesn't surprise me." He walked off without another word. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. Later that night, Mara sat alone on the steps outside the hangar, the desert cooling fast around her. The stars were brighter out here, sharper, honest. She rolled a small metal ring between her fingers, a habit she'd picked up years ago. Footsteps approached. "You always sit out here?" Sparrow asked. "Only when I can't sleep," Mara replied. Sparrow sat beside her without asking. They didn't speak for a while. People think moments like tonight change things, Sparrow said eventually. They don't, not right away. Mara nodded. They change how people watch you. Yes, Sparrow said, and what they wait for. Mara glanced at her. What do they wait for? Your mistake. The words weren't bitter, just factual. Mara swallowed, and if it comes. Sparrow looked up at the sky. Then it will be loud. Silence returned. Mara finally asked the question she'd been holding since the canyon. Why did you choose Overwatch tonight? Sparrow's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Because someone else asked not to. That was all she said. The following weeks blurred into routine and tension, training runs, simulations, night flights that pushed boundaries without crossing them. Mara noticed subtle changes. She was briefed earlier, asked questions, given fewer disclaimers. Still watched. Always watched. Sparrow remained a constant presence, sometimes distant, sometimes suddenly close like she'd appeared out of thin air. They never talked about the canyon again. Until one afternoon, when the alarm sounded mid-training. Real, not a drill. Mara was already moving before the words registered. Aircraft ready in 2, she called. The mission brief was rushed, incomplete, a high-value extraction gone wrong, urban environment, tight airspace. Sparrow appeared at the door, rifle case slung over her shoulder. You flying? She asked. Mara nodded. You shooting? Sparrow's lips pressed into a thin line. If I have to. The city rose around them like a maze of concrete and shadows. Smoke curled from somewhere they couldn't see yet. Mara threaded the helicopter through gaps that barely existed. Buildings rushed past. Radio chatter layered into noise. Taking fire, someone shouted. Mara banked hard, compensating for crosswind and adrenaline. Roof at 11 o'clock, Sparrow said calmly. Hostile. Mara adjusted altitude by instinct. Sparrow fired once. The threat disappeared. They didn't celebrate. As they approached the extraction point, something felt wrong. The air was too still, the streets too empty. Mara slowed. Something off, she said. Sparrow didn't argue. I feel it too. Then the world exploded. A shockwave rocked the helicopter. Warning lights flared. The engine screamed. Engine failure, the crew chief yelled. Mara's hands moved before fear could form. She dumped altitude, fighting the yaw. Buildings blurred. Sirens wailed somewhere below. Clear that street, Sparrow said. Now. Mara did. The helicopter slammed down harder than she wanted. Metal shrieked. Silence followed. For half a second, no one moved. Then voices, groans. Mara unstrapped, heart hammering. Everyone out, she shouted. Smoke filled the cabin. Outside, Sparrow was already moving, rifle up, eyes scanning. Multiple contacts, Sparrow said. We're exposed. Mara looked at the crippled helicopter, then at Sparrow. Go, Mara said. I'll cover. Sparrow hesitated, just once. Then nodded. As the team moved, gunfire erupted again. Mara returned fire with a sidearm she hated but trusted enough. A round cracked past her shoulder, too close. She felt something tear through her sleeve. Pain flared, sharp and hot. She didn't stop. Only when the team cleared did Sparrow grab her arm and pull her back. You're bleeding. I know. They ran. Later, much later, Mara sat on the floor of a field hospital, arm bandaged, exhaustion finally catching up. Sparrow stood nearby, helmet off, face pale under the lights. You stayed, Sparrow said quietly. Mara shrugged weakly. So did you. Sparrow shook her head. I was trained too. Mara met her eyes. So was I. Something shifted then, not dramatic, not loud. Just honest. Because courage wasn't always about charging forward. Sometimes it was about refusing to leave. And in that moment, both of them understood something deeper. They weren't trying to be seen anymore. They were just trying to be worthy of the silence that followed their choices. And that silence was beginning to listen. What happens when the body heals faster than the doubt? Mara hated the quietest hours of recovery the most. Not the pain. Pain had edges, rules, something you could measure. It was the waiting that hollowed her out. The enforced stillness. The way time stretched when motion was taken away. Her arm was immobilized, wrapped tight, a reminder she couldn't ignore. The medics said she was lucky. A few centimeters deeper and she wouldn't be sitting upright, staring at the canvas ceiling of a forward medical tent, listening to distant rotors come and go. Lucky was a word people used when they didn't know what else to say. She flexed her fingers slowly, testing sensation. Still there, still hers. Across the tent, Sparrow sat on a folding chair, rifle case at her feet, hands resting loosely on her knees. She hadn't left. Not when the doctors finished. Not when command came through asking questions. Not even when the adrenaline faded and left behind that familiar, bone-deep exhaustion. "You don't have to stay," Mara said eventually. Sparrow didn't look up. "I know." Silence again. Outside, someone laughed. It sounded wrong in here, like laughter always did after something nearly went very wrong. Mara swallowed. Rhodes came by. Sparrow's eyes flicked toward her, and he said I'd be grounded for a bit. Mara paused. Then he said he'd never seen anyone hold a bird together that long on instinct alone. Sparrow nodded once. He noticed. "That's not the same as trusting," Mara said. "No," Sparrow agreed. "It's the step before." The words lingered. Mara turned her head slightly, studying Sparrow more openly than she ever had. The sniper looked older in this light, not by years but by weight, the kind you carried behind the eyes. "You hesitated," Mara said quietly. Sparrow didn't deny it. "That almost got me killed," Mara added, not accusing, just honest. Sparrow's jaw tightened. She leaned forward, forearms resting on her thighs. "I hesitated because I've buried pilots," she said. "Because I've watched wreckage burn and told myself it was the math, not the moment." Mara absorbed that. "And tonight?" Mara asked. Sparrow exhaled slowly. "Tonight the math said leave, something else said don't." Mara closed her eyes. Neither of them spoke after that. Recovery pulled Mara out of rotation longer than she wanted. Physical therapy in the mornings, simulators in the afternoons, endless evaluations dressed up as concern. She passed them all. Still, she watched helicopters lift without her, felt the absence like an ache behind the sternum. Every mission briefing she wasn't in felt like a door closing quietly. Sparrow disappeared for days at a time. When she returned, she never explained where she'd been. She didn't have to. They crossed paths again on a range at dusk. Mara was running a simulator drill, one-handed, jaw set in concentration. Sparrow stopped behind her unseen. "You compensate early," Sparrow said. Mara didn't flinch. "You watch too much." "It's my job." Mara finished the run, then powered down. "They won't clear me for live flight until next week." "Good," Sparrow said. "You rush things." Mara turned. "You're one to talk." Sparrow's mouth curved slightly. "Fair." They stood there, the sun bleeding out across the horizon. "I heard you requested me on your next op," Mara said. Sparrow didn't deny it. "I did." "Why?" "Because you don't panic," Sparrow replied, "and because you don't fly like you're trying to prove something." Mara considered that. "I'm trying to prove something." Sparrow shook her head. "Not to them." That night Mara dreamed of the canyon again. The wind, the narrowing walls. This time the helicopter didn't shake. It moved cleanly like it belonged there. She woke before dawn, heart steady. The clearance came through at 6:10. No ceremony, just a signature and a nod. By 700, she was walking across the tarmac again, helmet under her arm still sore but functional. The helicopter waited. So did Sparrow. The mission was different this time, not reactive, not rushed, a long-range operation with consequences that wouldn't show up on maps. They flew low and quiet. Hours passed, the kind of hours where trust either deepened or cracked. At altitude, Sparrow leaned forward slightly. You ever think about what happens after? Mara glanced at her. After what? After people stop doubting you, Sparrow said. After the silence changes. Mara thought about that. I think they start expecting things. Sparrow nodded. Exactly. They reached the holding point just as the sun dipped low. The terrain ahead was open, unforgiving. No room for error. Wind going to turn, Mara said. Sparrow watched the landscape. In 30 seconds. They waited. It turned. Mara smiled without realizing it. Insertion went clean, too clean. Mara pulled back, holding position. Her eyes scanned constantly. She trusted Sparrow now. That didn't mean she trusted the night. Minutes passed. Then Sparrow's voice came over the radio, different than before, tighter. Mara, I need you closer. Mara didn't ask why. She descended, skimming terrain she shouldn't have been able to read in this light. 10 more meters, Sparrow said. Mara edged forward. A shot rang out, close. Mara felt the helicopter jerk. Warning lights flickered. I'm hit, Sparrow said, breath sharp. Leg. Time fractured. Mara's hands moved. Her mind narrowed. Can you move? Mara asked. Yes, Sparrow said, then after a beat, but I can't finish this. Mara understood immediately what Sparrow wasn't saying. Mark the target, Mara said. Mara. Mark it. Sparrow hesitated, not out of fear, out of principle. Then she did. Mara adjusted altitude, position, angle, things helicopters weren't meant to do. On your mark, she said. Sparrow exhaled, now. Mara fired the mounted weapon once. The threat disappeared. Silence followed. Mara landed hard, not graceful, effective. She was out of the cockpit before the rotors stopped. Sparrow was pale, blood dark against her uniform but conscious. You broke protocol, Sparrow said weakly. Mara lifted her without hesitation. So did you. Extraction was messy, painful, successful. Back at base, as medics swarmed Sparrow, she grabbed Mara's wrist. You didn't have to do that, Sparrow said. Yes, Mara replied, I did. Later, when the dust settled, Rhodes stood in front of both of them. His voice was quieter than usual. You saved the mission, he said, both of you. He paused. You also rewrote a few rules. Mara waited. So don't expect this to get easier, Rhodes finished. Mara nodded. Sparrow smiled faintly. As they were wheeled and walked away, respectively, the base settled back into routine. Reports would be filed, lessons extracted, names added to quiet lists. But something fundamental had shifted. Not because they were flawless, but because when the moment demanded choice over comfort, they chose each other. And sometimes, that was the most dangerous decision of all. Because once trust is earned in silence, it expects to be honored every time after. What does it cost to keep choosing the hard thing when no one is watching? The question followed Mara into the next weeks like a shadow that didn't move with the sun. Sparrow was moved to recovery farther inland. Classified. Temporary, they said. Everything important was always temporary until it was. Mara flew anyway. She flew because grounding didn't erase missions, because helicopters didn't care about doubt or loyalty, because air still needed cutting through, even when trust on the ground felt thinner. The first flight without Sparrow felt wrong, not unsafe, just incomplete. Her new Overwatch was competent, quiet, professional, but the rhythm was off. Callouts came a half-second later than Mara expected. Adjustments felt reactive instead of intuitive. They completed the mission. No casualties. On paper it was clean. In her chest it was. Back at base, Mara sat alone on the tailgate of a transport truck, boots dangling, helmet resting beside her. The sky burned orange and purple as the sun sank, indifferent to human effort. She took out the metal ring again, rolling it between her fingers. A medic passing by paused. "You know she's going to be fine, right?" Mara looked up. "You talking about Sparrow?" The medic nodded. "She's stubborn, those heal faster." Mara smiled faintly. "So I've heard." The next message came 3 days later. No sender, no pleasantries. "You don't get to quit now." Mara read it twice, then once more. She deleted it and felt lighter for doing so. Command briefed her that afternoon. A long-range operation, high altitude, hostile weather, no margin. "Your lead," Rhodes said. Mara met his eyes. "Who's Overwatch?" Rhodes hesitated, just enough. "We couldn't wait," he said. "Sparrow not cleared." Mara nodded. "Then I fly." That night the wind was wrong from the start. Too restless, too eager. Mara adjusted constantly, flying by feel more than instruments. The terrain rose and fell like something breathing. Halfway in, the storm hit. Not sudden, not dramatic, just relentless. Rain lashed the cockpit. Turbulence clawed at the airframe. "Visibility dropping," her co-pilot said. "I know," Mara replied. They pushed on. On the ground, the team ran into resistance earlier than planned. Gunfire echoed through the radio. Orders overlapped. Someone screamed, then cut off. Mara's pulse stayed steady. She felt cold instead. "Mark your position," she said. Coordinates came in garbled, incomplete. "Again," she said, firmer. They came through. Mara turned into the wind instead of away from it. The helicopter protested. "So do I," she muttered. She found them in a clearing that shouldn't have worked. She made it work anyway. As the team boarded, a blast rocked the perimeter. Shrapnel rattled against the hull. "Go," she shouted. They lifted off under fire. At altitude, the storm worsened. Instruments flickered. The helicopter shuddered violently. "Engine temps rising," the co-pilot warned. Mara's jaw tightened. She eased power instead of adding it. They limped home. After landing, she sat in the cockpit long after the rotors stopped, hands still on the controls. Later, alone in her quarters, Mara finally allowed herself to feel it. The exhaustion. The frustration. The quiet anger at how fragile everything still felt. She pressed her palms into her eyes until colors burst behind them. A knock came at the door. She almost didn't answer. Almost. Sparrow stood there, leaning on a crutch, hair shorter than before, eyes sharper. "You look like hell," Sparrow said. Mara laughed once, breathless. "You're supposed to be in recovery." "I escaped," Sparrow replied, "temporarily." They stood there, unsure who should speak next. Mara stepped aside. "Come in." Sparrow did. They sat on opposite ends of the narrow room. The silence between them was familiar now, comfortable, heavy. "You flew without me," Sparrow said. "I had to." "I know." A pause. "It was harder," Mara admitted. Sparrow nodded. "It always is." Mara looked at her. "Then why do we keep doing it?" Sparrow's gaze dropped to the floor, then lifted again. "Because if we don't, someone else pays." The answer settled deep. Sparrow shifted slightly, wincing. "They want me back soon." Mara's chest tightened, cleared. "Not yet," Sparrow met her eyes, "but they're pushing." "Because of me." "Because of what we do together," Sparrow corrected. Mara absorbed that. They didn't speak of the night Sparrow was hit, or the protocol broken, or the rule that bent instead of breaking. They didn't need to. The next mission came faster than expected. Border region, denied airspace, extraction under political pressure. Rhodes didn't sugarcoat it. If this goes wrong, it never happened. Mara glanced at Sparrow, now walking without the crutch but not without pain. "You're cleared," Mara asked quietly. "Conditionally," Sparrow replied, "like everything else." They flew at dawn. The air was thin, unforgiving. As they approached the target zone, Sparrow leaned forward, voice steady but low. "Mara, there's something you should know." Mara kept her eyes forward. "Say it." "If this turns bad," Sparrow said, "Command will choose the aircraft over the shooter." Mara's grip tightened. "I know," she said. Sparrow watched her carefully. "That doesn't bother you?" Mara didn't answer right away. "No," she said finally, "it clarifies things." The mission unfolded slowly, then all at once. A misidentified contact, a delayed call, a shot that came from somewhere it shouldn't have. Sparrow returned fire, precise, controlled. Then silence. "Too much of it." "Mara," Sparrow said. Her voice was different now, strained. "I'm pinned." Mara felt the world narrow. "I see you," she said. And she did. The terrain offered one option, dangerous, technically unsound. Mara didn't hesitate. She descended. "Abort," came over the radio. "That's an order." Mara ignored it. The helicopter took fire. Alarms screamed. "Mara," Sparrow shouted. "I've got you," Mara said. She brought the aircraft in low and fast, skids scraping rock, rotors screaming protest. Sparrow ran, limping, blood darkening her leg again. Mara held the hover anyway. Sparrow jumped. The helicopter lurched. Mara pulled up, heart hammering, hands steady. They cleared the ridge by meters. Only when the sky opened up again did Mara realize she was shaking. Back at base, no one cheered. They didn't need to. Rhodes waited for them in the hangar. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said. Mara met his eyes. "Yes, sir." Rhodes looked at Sparrow, then back at Mara. "You also saved an operator," he said quietly. Silence. "Get cleaned up," Rhodes said. "We'll talk later." As they walked away together, Sparrow glanced at Mara. "You chose me," Sparrow said. Mara didn't slow. "I chose the mission." Sparrow smiled faintly. "That's not what it felt like." Sometimes, the hardest choices weren't the ones that got you noticed. They were the ones that forced you to live with yourself afterward. And Mara knew now, truly knew. That silence didn't just listen. It remembered. What remains when the noise fades and all the choices come home. The days after the extraction passed without ceremony. No reprimand, no praise, just waiting. Waiting always came last, after adrenaline burned away and reality crept back in through paperwork and silence. Mara was grounded again, this time officially. Her helicopter sat on the far edge of the tarmac, roped off, mechanics crawling over it like ants studying damage that could be measured and blamed. She watched from a distance, hands in her pockets, feeling strangely calm. She had known this was coming. Sparrow recovered in a different way now. Slower, quieter. She walked with less pain but more weight. Some injuries healed clean. Others rearranged how you stood in the world. They met in the early mornings when the base was still half asleep. Coffee that tasted like burnt soil. The sky pale and undecided. "Command's reviewing everything," Sparrow said one morning. Mara nodded. "They always do." "They're not just reviewing," Sparrow added. "They're deciding." Mara didn't ask what decision. She already knew. Later that week, the order came through. A closed-door board, senior command, no advocates, no spectators. Just questions. Mara stood in a small room with blank walls and a table too clean to be trusted. Across from her sat officers whose voices never rose and never softened. "You violated a direct order," one said. "Yes, sir." "You endangered a strategic asset." "Yes, sir." "You prioritized a single operator over broader operational risk." Mara inhaled slowly. "I prioritized the mission outcome." A pause. "Explain." "She didn't rush. She never had." "If Sparrow was lost," Mara said, "the mission would have failed, not immediately, but eventually. She was the point of balance. Removing her would have shifted everything." The officers exchanged glances. "That's not doctrine," one said. "No, sir," Mara replied. "It's observation." Silence followed. Finally, the senior officer leaned back. "You don't sound regretful." Mara met his eyes. "I'm not." That ended the questions. Outside, Sparrow waited, not packing, just standing, eyes forward, hands loose at her sides. "Well?" Sparrow asked when Mara emerged. Mara shrugged. "I told the truth." Sparrow nodded. "That usually costs something." It did. Mara was reassigned, not out, not punished, moved sideways into a role that looked like a ceiling disguised as opportunity: instructor, evaluator, someone who taught from the ground instead of the air. The helicopter she loved lifted without her. At first it felt like failure. Then it felt like grief. Weeks passed, new pilots cycled through, some confident, some careful, some loud enough to hide how unsure they were. Mara watched them all. She taught without speeches, without warnings. She corrected gently, precisely. She waited for them to feel mistakes instead of fearing them. Sparrow was deployed again. Different teams, different skis. They stayed in contact through short messages that said everything by saying almost nothing. Still breathing. Winds ugly tonight. Didn't miss. One evening, months later, Mara stood alone at the edge of the range as the sun dipped low. A helicopter approached, unfamiliar but flying wrong. Too fast, too rigid. She felt it in her chest before the pilot felt it in the controls. The aircraft wobbled, overcorrected. Mara keyed the radio. "Easy, let it settle." A voice answered, young, tight, "I've got it." Mara didn't argue, she waited. The wobble worsened. "Now," Mara said, "wait now." The pilot hesitated, then did. The helicopter stabilized. It landed rough but intact. The pilot climbed out, pale and shaken. "I almost lost it." Mara nodded. "You almost forced it." The pilot looked at her. "How did you know?" Mara glanced toward the horizon, where wind traced patterns you had to feel to understand. "Because it always tells you," she said. "You just have to listen." That night, Sparrow returned without warning. No injuries this time, just tired eyes and a stillness that came from surviving something you didn't talk about yet. They sat together on the hood of a vehicle, watching aircraft move against the dark. "They grounded you," Sparrow said quietly. "Yes." "You okay with that?" Mara thought about it. "I miss flying," she said, "but I don't miss who I'd become if I kept choosing ambition over instinct." Sparrow considered that. "You chose me." "I chose the truth," Mara replied. "You were part of it." Sparrow smiled faintly. "That's better." Later, as the base slept, Sparrow spoke again. "They offered me something," she said. Mara turned. "What kind of something?" "A command track position, less field work, more influence." Mara felt a strange mix of relief and loss. "And?" "I said no." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I don't want to be remembered for decisions I didn't make with my own hands." They sat in silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy. Years passed quietly after that. Mara became known as the instructor who didn't talk much but saw everything, the one whose approval meant more than praise. Pilots trusted her without knowing why. Sparrow continued operating, less often, more selectively. When she did, missions ended clean. They crossed paths less frequently, but when they did, nothing needed explaining. One winter morning, Mara stood at the range watching a new class rotate through drills. Wind cut sharp across the ground. Flags snapped, then went still. A young pilot adjusted nervously beside her. "Ma'am," he said, "how do you know when to act?" Mara watched the flags, the dust, the air. "You don't," she said. "You know when not to." He frowned, confused. She didn't clarify. That afternoon, Sparrow visited the hangar, older now, scar faint but visible, eyes steady. "They're retiring my rifle," Sparrow said, "putting it behind glass." Mara smiled. "Does that bother you?" Sparrow shook her head. "The work's already done." They walked together across the tarmac, shadows long and merging. "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" Sparrow asked. Mara thought of the canyon, the city street, the order she ignored. "No," she said. "I wish people understood sooner that strength doesn't announce itself." Sparrow nodded. "It waits." They stopped near the edge of the base, where the land opened wide and quiet. The wind passed between them, unseen but undeniable. And in that moment it was clear. They hadn't been heroes. They hadn't been perfect. They hadn't even been fully understood. But they had acted when it mattered. They had chosen with clarity. They had stood by the cost of their choices. And sometimes that is all integrity ever is. Because dignity doesn't argue. It doesn't demand. It doesn't explain itself afterward. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.